we're starting off the list with Unit 731 and its human experimentation. Unit 731 was a covert biological and chemical warfare research and development unit of the Imperial Japanese Army during World War II. Operating in Japanese-occupied China, particularly in the Pingfang district of Harbin, Unit 731 conducted inhumane experiments on thousands of Chinese, Korean, and other prisoners of war, as well as civilians, including women and young ones. The unit was responsible for numerous atrocities. They conducted experiments to study the effects of biological weapons such as anthrax, plague, and cholera on human subjects. Prisoners were infected with these deadly diseases to observe their progression and develop methods of contagion. Often subjected to dissection without anesthesia, they were also exposed to freezing temperatures to observe the effects of frostbite. Some experiments involved forcing victims to stand barefoot in the snow until their limbs froze, allowing researchers to study the gangrene that followed. Researchers also tested various weapons like bombs and flamethrowers on live human subjects to observe their effectiveness and impact on the human body. Some prisoners were tied to stakes and used as targets for grenades and other explosives to study the effects of shrapnel wounds. This is just the tip of the iceberg too. The things carried out here were absolutely nightmarish. And at number 9, we have human zoos. These were actually just what they sound like. You'd think human zoos are something out of like a science fiction movie or something, humans being held in captivity and observed in their quote-unquote natural habitat by aliens, but this really was a thing right here on Earth. There was a human zoo right in Coney Island. Human zoos existed shockingly up until the 1930s, possibly even further than that. Really not that long ago. Human zoos were public exhibits of people, typically from non-Western cultures, displayed in a zoo-like environment during the 19th and early 20th centuries. These exhibits were part of colonial exhibitions and world's fairs in Europe and North America. These zoos were made to emphasize the belief in the cultural and racial superiority of Europeans over non-European people at the time. People from various indigenous cultures and ethnic groups, Africans, Native Americans, Asians, Pacific Islanders, they were often brought to these exhibitions. They were made to live in mock natural habitats, perform dances and ceremonies, and regular daily activities, all within the confines of a designated exhibit area. Exhibits were often accompanied by posters and pamphlets and educational displays, reinforcing these very stereotypical and misconceptions about the exhibited cultures. Pretty wild stuff. Next on the list we have the Radium Girls. The term Radium Girl refers to female factory workers who were employed by the United States Radium Corporation in New Jersey and the Radium Dial Company in Illinois in 1917 to about 1926. These workers were responsible for painting watch dials with a luminous paint containing radium. What they weren't told at the time is that radium is incredibly toxic. These workers were tasked with using small brushes to paint radium-based paint onto watch and clock dials to create precise markings. They were often told to shape the brush using their lips and tongues so that they'd have a more kind of sharp tip. So they were just ingesting radium on a regular basis. Over time, many of the Radium Girls began to experience some serious health problems: anemia, bone fractures, necrosis of the jaw. They also developed various cancers. As these health issues started coming to light, some of the women sought legal action against the companies. In the 1920s, several workers filed lawsuits against the USRC and Radium Dial Company for negligence and demanding compensation for their suffering. In the end, this case played a big role in the types of safety standards we have in workplaces today. Number 7, the Kalavryta massacre. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Most of you have probably heard of the massacre in Oradour-sur-Glane, France by SS soldiers. Well, stuff just like that was happening all the time in World War II, and this incident was very similar but much less known, at least outside of Greece. This massacre occurred during World War II in December of 1943. It was a brutal event carried out by German forces in retaliation for the Greek resistance activities against the Axis occupation in Greece. During the German occupation of Greece, the Greek resistance movement actively fought against these German forces. In response to the resistance activities, the SS targeted civilians, especially in small towns and villages, as a means of punishment, and they just wanted to send out a message. On December 13th, 1943, German troops, part of the 117th Jaeger Division, surrounded the town of Kalavryta in the Peloponnese region of Greece. The soldiers systematically destroyed the town and its surrounding villages. Men, women, and children were gathered in the town square. The Germans separated the men from the women. The men were while the women and young ones were locked inside a school building, which was then set on fire. Those who attempted to escape the burning building were by the German forces. Some women and children managed to escape though. One German soldier couldn't stand it anymore and opened a door, allowing some prisoners to flee. This soldier was later punished by death. After the war, some of the responsible German officers were tried for war crimes, but most of them escaped justice, and some were never even identified. Next on the list, we have the Vipeholm experiments. These unethical experiments were conducted on mentally disabled patients in Sweden between 1945 and 1955. The experiments aimed to study the effects of sugar on dental health. This was initiated by the Swedish National Board of Health and Welfare to investigate sugar consumption and its effects on teeth. The study took place at Vipeholm Mental Institution in Lund, Sweden, and test subjects were the institutionalized residents of Vipeholm, many of whom had mental disabilities. They were vulnerable, they couldn't provide informed consent. The subjects would be divided into two groups, with one group being given unrestricted access to sugary foods and candies, while the other were given controlled amounts. The aim was to observe the progression of dental cavities in these groups. Excessive amounts of sugary foods were given to some of the patients, far beyond what would be considered normal or healthy. Surprisingly, this led to severe dental problems. The researchers were deliberately inflicting harm on vulnerable people, and what makes this whole thing even sadder is that the results of the experiment weren't even released until years later because of how bad it looked on the confectionery industry, who were actually helping financing this. So this led to some to believe that the researchers were bought off just to keep quiet. It wasn't until the 90s where the cruel nature of these experiments finally came to light, being condemned by the public. Number 5, Attack of the Dead Men. The Attack of the Dead Men refers to a military engagement that occurred during World War I on August 6, 1915. There was a Russian stronghold located near the town of Jessup in the Eastern Front. It was a key defensive position for the Russians against German advances. The German army, as part of the wider Central Powers offensive on the Eastern Front, attacked the fortress, aiming to break through the Russian defenses. During the battle, the Germans employed chlorine gas, a chemical weapon to weaken the Russian defenses. The gas was intended to incapacitate or unalive the soldiers defending the fortress. Now, despite being affected by this gas, some Russian soldiers, driven by pure desperation and with cloths or handkerchiefs soaked in water covering their faces, counterattacked the advancing German forces. The gas masks available at the time were not effective against chlorine gas, and the sight of Russian soldiers appearing with their faces covered in white cloths and just blood-stained from the effects of the gas, it gave rise to this legend of the dead men. They basically looked like zombies rising up and moving towards the enemy. And the fierceness of the counterattack, combined with the horrifying appearance of these Russian soldiers, caused complete terror among the German troops. They fled, and they're still being attacked from behind. Many of them died, getting trapped in their own traps and stuff. Germans believed they were facing the spirits of the dead, panicked and abandoned their on the fortress. Really cool story. Number 4, an often overlooked dark historical event is the forced sterilization programs that took place in the United States. Hard to believe this actually took place, but it did, beginning in the early 1900s up until the 70s, if you can believe that. Several states implemented eugenics programs aiming to control the population and improve the genetic quality of society. One of the methods used was forced sterilization, targeting individuals considered unfit for reproduction. The victims of these programs were often people deemed socially undesirable, people with mental illnesses, disabilities, and individuals from marginalized communities, African and Native Americans primarily. It's estimated that tens of thousands of people were forcibly sterilized under these state-sanctioned programs. The exact number difficult to determine because of poor record keeping and the fact that these procedures were kind of swept under the rug. Number 3, the Great Molasses Flood. On January 15th, 1919, a massive storage tank containing 2.3 million gallons of molasses collapsed in the North End neighborhood of Boston, Massachusetts. The Great Molasses Flood, also known as the Boston Molasses Disaster, resulted in widespread destruction and loss of life. The tank had been poorly constructed with weak rivets and insufficient safety measures. At around 12:30 p.m., the tank suddenly burst, releasing a wave of molasses, estimated to be about 25 feet high, moving at a speed of 35 miles per hour. The molasses wave engulfed the neighborhood, causing significant damage to buildings and streets and the Boston Elevated Railway. The disaster resulted in 21 people losing their lives and around 150 others being injured. The tank had been filled to capacity just 2 days before, and the increased pressure probably contributed to this collapse. The disappearance of the USS Cyclops. So the USS Cyclops was a United States Navy cargo ship that mysteriously disappeared during World War I. The ship was used primarily for transporting coal and was one of the Navy's largest fuel ships at the time. In March of 1918, during World War I, the USS Cyclops departed from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, and made stops in Barbados and the Virgin Islands. Its final destination was Baltimore. The ship never reached its destination, though. It vanished without a trace along its route, disappearing in the infamous Bermuda Triangle. No wreckage or survivors were ever found. Various theories have been proposed as to why the ship vanished. Could have been from a storm, structural failure, or an enemy attack, but none have been proven. The disappearance of this ship resulted in the loss of 309 crew members and passengers, making it one of the largest non-combat losses of life in U.S. naval history. And finally, we're going to finish things off with a bizarre one, with the trial of a corpse. This happened in January of 897 AD, several months after the death of Pope Formosus. After Formosus died, his body was exhumed and he was put on trial. Not before he died, after. The trial was orchestrated by Pope Stephen VI or 7th. There's some debate on that, but he really just wasn't a fan of Formosus. Stephen accused Formosus of perjury, violating church laws, and of being an illegitimate pope. During the trial, Formosus's 7-month-old rotting corpse was dressed up and placed on a throne. A deacon was appointed to act as his advocate, answering questions on behalf of the dead pope. Formosus was found guilty on all charges. His papacy was declared invalid, and his acts as pope were declared invalid. 3 fingers on his right hand, which he had used for blessings, were then severed, and his remains were thrown into a river. After Pope Stephen VI's death, Pope Theodore II annulled the whole trial and restored Formosus's honors and good name. He called the trial a travesty, declaring the verdict null and void.
From whistleblowers to catastrophic events that defy explanation, this list is truly out of this world. These are 10 examples of historical events that may have been extraterrestrial encounters covered up by the government. The Tunguska event of 1908 remains one of the most mysterious occurrences in modern history, with a massive explosion leveling over 2,000 square kilometers of Siberian forest. Official explanations point to a meteorite or comet exploding in the atmosphere, but no impact crater was ever found. Some believe that the explosion was actually caused by a crashing alien spacecraft or even a high-energy alien weapon test gone wrong. The idea is that the lack of concrete evidence and the remote location made it the perfect event to cover up as a natural disaster. Supporters of this theory argue that the unusual patterns of destruction and the strange eyewitness reports, like seeing a fiery object streaking across the sky, suggest something far more extraordinary than a mere space rock. Could it be that this massive blast was actually an alien encounter that governments have quietly swept under the rug? The Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD was a catastrophic event that engulfed the city in flames for 6 days, leaving massive destruction in its wake. While history often blames the fire on Emperor Nero's negligence, or perhaps even his malicious intent, some alternative theories offer a far more intriguing explanation: an alien mishap. According to this theory, the fire wasn't a result of human actions at all, but rather the crash or malfunction of an extraterrestrial spacecraft or weapon. To prevent mass hysteria and conceal this shocking encounter, the story goes that Emperor Nero pointed fingers at the Christians, using them as scapegoats to divert attention from the true cause. The rapid spread and intensity of the blaze, coupled with the strange accounts from that time, have led some to speculate that Rome's fiery disaster might actually have been an alien incident covered up by the Empire to avoid panic and maintain control. The Battle of Los Angeles in 1942 is one of the most puzzling events in wartime history. In the early hours of February 25th, air raid sirens blared across Los Angeles, and anti-aircraft firearms lit up the night sky, firing over 1,400 shells at what was believed to be an enemy aircraft. However, no aircraft was ever recovered, and there was no evidence of a Japanese attack, so what were they shooting at? Officially, the government chalked it up to a false alarm, possibly triggered by war nerves, but not everyone is totally convinced. Some theorists argue that the military was actually targeting a UFO, an unidentified flying object that appeared over the city. Witnesses reported seeing a large, slow-moving craft illuminated by searchlights, seemingly unaffected by the intense artillery barrage. Could it have been an alien craft silently hovering over Los Angeles, immune to human weaponry? The sudden dismissal of the incident as a mere false alarm and the lack of any tangible enemy debris leads some to believe that this was a deliberate cover-up, hiding an extraterrestrial encounter from the public eye. The Aurora, Texas UFO crash of 1897 is one of the earliest recorded incidents of a supposed alien encounter in the United States. According to reports, a strange flying object plummeted from the sky and crashed near the small town of Aurora, and remarkably, locals claimed to have discovered a small alien body among the wreckage. This curious event was even reported in local newspapers, detailing not just the crash but also the burial of the alien being in the town cemetery. However, the story was quickly labeled a hoax by authorities, with skeptics dismissing it as a prank or a case of mistaken identity. But why was it so swiftly swept under the rug? Some believe the dismissal was a deliberate cover-up to avoid public panic and to keep the public in the dark about the possibility of extraterrestrial life. The sudden shift from serious news coverage to complete denial raises eyebrows, suggesting that something far more extraordinary than a mere hoax might have occurred that day in Aurora. The Kishtim disaster of 1957 was a catastrophic radioactive contamination incident in the Soviet Union that was shrouded in secrecy for decades. Officially, the disaster was attributed to a failure in the cooling system of a nuclear waste storage tank, leading to an explosion that released massive amounts of radiation into the environment. However, of course, some theorists suggest that the true case of this disaster might have been much stranger than a mere human error. They propose that the contamination was linked to a malfunctioning alien spacecraft or an extraterrestrial experiment gone awry, causing a catastrophic release of radioactive materials. The theory goes that rather than admitting to an alien presence on Earth and the resulting panic that might ensue, Soviet authorities chose to cover up the event with a more mundane, albeit still alarming, explanation. The unusual secrecy surrounding the disaster and the Soviet Union's quick suppression of any public knowledge about it have fueled these suspicions. Could the Kishtim disaster have been an alien encounter that went horribly wrong, concealed by the Soviet regime to avoid global hysteria? I don't know. You tell me at this point. The Fatima miracle of 1917 is often celebrated as a divine event, where thousands of people in Fatima, Portugal reported seeing the sun dance, zigzag, and emit radiant colors across the sky. Described by many as a miracle, the phenomenon has been a cornerstone of religious faith for millions. However, some theorists suggest that what those people actually witnessed wasn't a miracle at all, but rather a UFO UFO event that was misunderstood by the crowd. Theories propose that an unidentified flying object might have been hovering high above, performing maneuvers that defied conventional understanding at the time. The bright lights and strange movements of this UFO could have been easily mistaken for the sun's bizarre behavior, especially to a crowd already primed for a miraculous experience. The Catholic Church's quick embrace of this event as a miracle might have conveniently overshadowed any further investigation into more otherworldly explanations. Was the dancing sun really a UFO, its alien visitors cloaked in the guise of a miracle, hidden in plain sight under the veil of faith? The UFO sighting over Nuremberg in 1561. On that fateful day, the skies above the German city were filled with strange, unidentified flying objects engaged in what appeared to be a full-blown aerial battle. Witnesses described seeing cylindrical objects, spheres, and crosses darting across the sky, all culminating in a massive crash outside the city. While skeptics argue that it was likely a misinterpreted atmospheric phenomenon, perhaps an unusual solar event or meteor shower, others believe this could have been one of the earliest recorded extraterrestrial encounters. The idea is that these strange objects weren't just figments of medieval imagination, but actual alien crafts engaging in some unknown conflict. The quick dismissal of the event as a natural occurrence, despite the detailed and widespread witness accounts, has led some to speculate that this was a deliberate attempt to downplay what might have been an alien visitation. The Washington, D.C. UFO incident of 1952 left the nation's capital in a state of shock and awe as multiple unidentified flying objects were seen darting across the skies over several nights. These mysterious crafts were not only visually observed by pilots and residents, but also tracked on radar, showing movements that defied the known capabilities of any aircraft at the time. The objects displayed sudden acceleration, sharp turns, and speeds far beyond what human technology could achieve in the 1950s. Despite the compelling evidence, the US Air Force was quick to dismiss the sightings, attributing them to a weather phenomenon called temperature inversion, which they claimed could create radar anomalies and optical illusions. However, this explanation didn't sit well with everyone, particularly those who witnessed the bizarre events firsthand. Many believe the official story was a calculated cover-up to avoid mass panic and to keep the truth about extraterrestrial visitors hidden. The erratic movements and evasive maneuvers of these UFOs suggest they were more than just a mirage or a radar glitch, possibly pointing to a genuine encounter with alien technology that authorities decided was better left unexplained. The Cape Girardeau UFO crash of 1941 is one of the lesser known yet very compelling stories that hint at early contact with extraterrestrial life. According to reports, a mysterious object crashed near Cape Girardeau, Missouri in the dead of night. Witnesses claim that among the wreckage, small alien-like beings were discovered, and a local reverend was even called to perform last rites for these strange entities. The eerie details don't stop there. Rumors suggest that the military swiftly intervened, collecting the wreckage and warning locals to remain silent about what they had seen. This incident predates the more famous Roswell crash by several years, suggesting that the US government might have known about extraterrestrial visitors much earlier than commonly thought. The fact that this event was quickly hushed up and dismissed as a non-event definitely raises some eyebrows. Could it be that the crash represents one of the first attempts to cover up an alien encounter, keeping the existence of extraterrestrials a secret from the public? With so few records and the story relegated to local whispers, it certainly seems like an intentional effort to bury what could have been a groundbreaking revelation about our place in the universe. The Maury Island incident of 1947 is a fascinating tale of UFO sightings, mysterious threats, and a possible government cover-up. Just days before the infamous Roswell incident, Harold Dahl reported seeing 6 UFOs while out boating in Puget Sound near Maury Island, Washington. He described the objects as donut-shaped and emitting strange metallic debris that caused damage to his boat and even injured his son. When Dahl shared his story, things took an even more chilling turn. He was allegedly visited by men in black who wanted him to keep quiet about what he had seen, suggesting severe consequences if he didn't comply. This encounter is considered one of the first instances of government intimidation related to UFO sightings, fueling speculation that authorities were desperate to suppress any evidence of extraterrestrial activity. The timing of the incident so close to Roswell definitely raises suspicions that there might have been a coordinated effort to keep the public in the dark about the presence of UFOs. Could the Maury Island incident have been an early attempt to cover up an alien encounter, using fear and secrecy to prevent the truth?
Did JFK die at the hands of a secret CIA sleeper agent?
Did Princess Diana really die in nothing more than a freak accident? Let's talk about it.
So, did the CIA order and orchestrate a hit on former President John F. Kennedy? Well, maybe. On November 22nd of 1963, a man named Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested for the assassination of the 35th President of the United States, John F. Kennedy, in Dallas, Texas. 2 days later, Oswald himself was killed by a nightclub owner named Jack Ruby. In the 1960s, 50% of the American population believed that Oswald had not acted alone. In 2017, that percentage rose to 61, and today, more than 2/3 of Americans believe there is more to the story than the government is letting on, and a large number of those people believe that the CIA had something to do with it. Why? Well, because just 1 month prior to President Kennedy's death, he had made the decision to withdraw the first contingent of US military forces from Vietnam. This decision sparked controversy and outrage from hardline military advocates, and it also came just 2 years after President Kennedy's failed Bay of Pigs invasion. It is believed that in relation to these two things, and to keep Kennedy from pulling any other troops out of overseas wars, the CIA actually hired Lee Harvey Oswald to kill Kennedy, and then Jack Ruby to kill Harvey in order to keep the secret as, well, a secret. Interestingly enough, there are a number of classified files pertaining to Kennedy's death being kept at the White House, and almost every president to get elected goes into the White House swearing to declassify these files, but they walk away acting as though they don't exist. Coincidence or cover-up? You tell me.
On August 31st of 1997 in Paris, Princess Diana, Dottie Fayed, and her driver Henry Paul and bodyguard Trevor Rees Jones suffered a fatal car accident. The bodyguard was the only survivor. Princess Diana and Dottie Al Fayed were in a romantic relationship. They'd been vacationing together in the French Riviera when they were relentlessly followed by swarms of paparazzi. As they left the Ritz Hotel in Paris, their car was chased by photographers on motorcycles. The car lost control, crashing into a concrete pillar. Now, there are a number of conspiracies surrounding Princess Diana's death, but the darkest has to be that the royal family themselves were behind the accident. Princess Diana had recently divorced Prince Charles, and leading up to her death, she was apparently concerned that something was going to happen to her. In October of 1996, Diana wrote a letter to her butler, and in part of the letter she talked about how she felt in danger, that she believed someone was planning to tamper with her car. So, was the royal family so disapproving of Diana's new potential marriage that they organized this incident and then covered it up to look like an accident? Let us know your thoughts down below.
Alright, let's talk about America's favorite conspiracy theory, the theory that the moon landing was fake. Did you know that 5% of Americans strongly believe the moon landing was fake? And honestly, I don't blame them. First of all of the supposed footage from the first moon landing was somehow miraculously erased. Sure. And then it was equally as miraculously recovered. However, it is clear that the footage has been altered, but that's okay because the government had to alter the footage in order to recover it. I call BS. Also, while Neil Armstrong was supposedly filming Buzz Aldrin on the moon, he can be seen in Aldrin's glasses holding nothing. No camera, no kind of recording device whatsoever. And then of course there is the fact that multiple astronauts, including Gus Grissom, have straight up said that the moon landing was fake. I guess the real question isn't was it fake, it's why was it faked? And for that, I have an answer. The geopolitical space race. Simply put, America was in a pissing contest with Russia during the 1960s. Furthermore, the American government believed that the lunar achievement would lead to an increase in foreign investments. A few pretty good reasons to fake the moon landing, if you ask me.
One of the most famous and controversial historical conspiracies is that the US government had advanced knowledge that there was going to be an attack on Pearl Harbor. This information was just withheld in order to anger the American public and get them on board with America getting involved in the war. On the morning of December 7th of 1941, Japan launched a surprise attack on the US naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, leading the United States to enter World War II. But some people think that President Roosevelt knew about the attack in advance and let it happen on purpose. He wanted the US to join the war against the Axis powers, but he faced a lot of opposition at the time. A lot of the American public wanted to stay out of the conflict. So what would ignite people's anger, unite them, and drive them into supporting the fight? An attack on American soil. And the attack did rally the American public, leading to a declaration of war against Japan and shortly after Germany and Italy. But what are your thoughts on this one? Did the president really sacrifice the lives of over 2,300 people as justification for American involvement in the war?
Here's a fun one. There is a secret government base filled with treasure hidden behind Mount Rushmore. While this might sound like the plot of the movie National Treasure, it is important to note that the theory has actually been around for far longer than the film. The idea of a secret base came to be after a secret base was built inside of the monument, directly behind Abraham Lincoln's head. Okay, not a secret base, but a small room. The door to the room was 18 feet high, and the room itself was 74 feet long with 35-foot tall ceilings. It was built by the original artist behind Mount Rushmore, Gutzon Borglum, who had hoped that one day the room would store important American documents. Unfortunately, Borglum died just 1 year after the project started, and so the room was abandoned. Or so they say. Many people believe that Borglum's dreams were in fact fulfilled and furthermore expanded upon, and that the monument now houses an entire secret government base that is home to some of the country's most diabolical secrets.
There's a pretty wild conspiracy theory about Queen Elizabeth I, that she was actually a man in disguise. The story goes that when Elizabeth was a young girl, she was sent away to a small village called Bisley to avoid the plague, but she ended up catching it anyway and died. The servants then freaked out because if her father, King Henry VIII, found out, they'd be in big trouble. So according to the theory, they found a young boy who looked like her and dressed him up as Elizabeth to take her place. The ruse worked, King Henry somehow didn't notice, and this fake Elizabeth grows up and becomes queen. Small piece of evidence here is that she never married or had children, and people described her at the time having sort of masculine features. I think most people today find this one pretty ridiculous. The idea that a father would not recognize the fact that his daughter was swapped, especially with a young boy, I mean, that's kind of laughable. But even if we are to entertain the whole attempting a ruse like this in the first place, you'd think they'd make their lives easier and just find a girl that looked like Elizabeth.
Alright, I have most definitely mentioned Tesla's death ray on this channel before, and that is because it is both fascinating and terrifying. In 1943, Tesla had brought the idea of a death ray, a massive particle beam that could incinerate entire armies within minutes, even at extremely far distances, to many of the world governments, including the government of the United States and the Soviets over in Russia. According to both America and Russia, the thing was never actually built, but when Tesla died, American forces collected all of the research that Tesla had left in his 2 New York hotel rooms as well as his American storage units. America claimed to have found no sufficient information about the death ray, but of course, America lies. Many people actually believe that Tesla either completed the ray while he was still alive, meaning it's currently in the hands of either Russia or America, or that Americans used his research to create it themselves. Either way, I'm terrified. I hope the world doesn't go boom.
Marilyn Monroe died in 1962 at the age of 36. Officially, it was ruled that she'd taken her own life, having overdosed on sleeping pills either on purpose or by mistake, but some people believe there's more to it than that. One theory is that Monroe was killed because she knew too much about powerful people. Specifically, that she was rumored to have been in an affair with President Kennedy, and when she threatened to expose it all, she was disposed of. Essayist Frank A. Capel first made these allegations in in 1964 in his self-published work, The Strange Death of Marilyn Monroe. He also accused President Kennedy of having communist ties, along with other people who were close to Marilyn Monroe. Now, Capel wasn't the only one who thought this. Over the years, tons of writers started putting their own conspiracy theories forward surrounding her death, a lot of them involving President Kennedy. Some think the FBI or CIA were actually the ones who carried out the act. Some think the mob was responsible, and people still question the circumstances of her death to this day.
Paul McCartney died in the 1960s and was replaced with a lookalike who has been touring with the Beatles ever since. This conspiracy theory began in November of 1966, which is when many fans believe Paul had his head ripped from his shoulders in a car accident after getting into an argument with his bandmates and leaving the studio. The conspiracy theory goes on to explain that, fearing for the band's future, the group devised a plan to replace Paul with a lookalike and then to completely cover up the fact that he had died on November 9th of that same year. Throughout the Beatles' post-Paul career, they apparently dropped numerous hints in their album artwork and in their song lyrics alluding to the singer-songwriter's death. If you were around in the 60s, I want to know what you think about this whole thing, and if you weren't, go ask your parents their thoughts and then go ahead and drop those thoughts down below.
People have been pondering the true identity of Jack the Ripper for nearly 150 years. For all the suspects that have been mentioned over the years, though, the strangest has to be the man behind one of the strangest pieces of literature in history, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. Yes, at one time Lewis Carroll was accused of being Jack the Ripper. In 1996, author Richard Wallace came out with a book called Jack the Ripper, Light-Hearted Friend, where he outlined this conspiracy. Essentially, he wrote about how Lewis Carroll lived fairly close to where the killings took place, and that Carroll had apparently inserted anagrams into his work that were clues about his truly violent nature. So the book's been highly criticized. I mean, anagrams as evidence? I don't know. I feel like anyone can just rearrange letters in a piece of writing and have it spell out an ominous message. You could probably do that. Someone should do that here with my little spiel. And we're starting things off at number 10 with the Sultana explosion. The Sultana explosion was a major disaster that happened during the American Civil War. On April 27, 1865, the steamboat Sultana, overloaded with Union soldiers recently released from the Confederate prison camps, exploded on the Mississippi River near Memphis, Tennessee. It is one of the deadliest maritime disasters in U.S. history. The ship was designed to carry around 376 passengers, but on this particular day it was carrying an estimated 2,100 people, including Union soldiers who had survived the Confederate prison camps like Andersonville. And the boat was overcrowded because the government paid a bonus for every soldier transported home, and the Sultana's owners, eager to, of course, make more money, ignored safety regulations. And the explosion occurred around 2 a.m. when the steam boilers ruptured, causing a massive fire. The disaster claimed the lives of over 1,800 people, many of whom were killed in the explosion, while others drowned or succumbed to injuries and exposure in the cold river waters. The exact cause of the explosion is still uncertain, but it was likely due to a combination of factors, including overcrowding, poor maintenance of the boilers, and the use of low-quality materials in the vessel's construction. Next up, we have the various types of human species. This is something that has always fascinated me. In the very distant past, there wasn't just one or two, but a total of 8 different human species that roamed the earth. These ancient relatives of ours existed at various times and in different parts of the world. Some existed at the same time, though. We Homo sapiens are the only surviving human species today. That's pretty obvious. The history of our family tree, though, pretty diverse. One of our earliest cousins was Homo habilis, who lived in Africa around 2.4 million years ago. They were skilled tool makers, scavengers. Then came Homo erectus. Probably heard of them. They appeared around 2 million years ago, and they were the first to venture out of Africa, spreading to Asia and beyond. Neanderthals, of course, or Homo neanderthalensis, lived in Europe and parts of Asia for hundreds of thousands of years. They were skilled hunters. They even created art. It's believed we just killed them all off, but some of their DNA actually still lingers in our population to this day, particularly amongst Europeans. Then we had Homo floresiensis, known as also hobbits, who inhabited Indonesia's Flores Island and stood like 3 feet tall. That'd be about, I guess, this. Homo naledi, a recently discovered species in South Africa, and we can't forget, of course, about the mysterious Denisovans, known from DNA extracted from a finger bone. They're an ancestor of both Neanderthals and Homo sapiens, though. They lived in Africa, Europe, and Asia. And finally, this one here lived in what is now Zambia and Zimbabwe. Number 8, rat kings. This is just really icky. I remember when I first heard about this, I cringed. Just the thought of this is awful. Rat kings are an odd and incredibly eerie phenomenon that has been reported a number of times over the years. So these occurrences involve groups of rats, typically 4 to 8 of them, becoming entangled by their tails, forming this like disturbing rat cluster. Pretty gnarly sight. The exact cause of rat kings is kind of a mystery. Some experts speculate that it happens when rats nest closely together in warm places and their tails become intertwined over time. Others suggest that it could be a result of just chance, of course, or unusual behavior amongst the rats. Rat kings have been reported in various parts of the world: Germany, France, and the United States. Number 7, the Tanganyika laughter epidemic. This one is very strange, similar to the dancing plague. If you watch this channel consistently, you know what that is. The Tanganyika laughter epidemic of 1962 is one of the strangest events in history, and I only just learned about it today. It all began in a remote girls' school in Kashasha, a small village in what is now Tanzania. Started with just 3 students who suddenly burst into uncontrollable fits of laughter, seemingly for no apparent reason. What made this phenomenon especially baffling was how infectious it proved to be. The laughter quickly spread to many of the other students, affecting 95 out of 159 girls at the school. And these episodes of this hysterical laughter varied in duration, lasting anywhere from a few hours to several days. They not only disrupted the normal routine of the school, but also extended to the point the school was actually forced to close its doors. Even more perplexing was the fact that the extensive medical examinations conducted at the time didn't identify any physical or infectious cause behind this odd behavior. And the main theory among experts is that the laughter epidemic was psychogenic, so it stemmed from psychological or emotional factors rather than some physical source. Believed to be a form of mass psychogenic illness, where the power of suggestion played a significant role in triggering and perpetuating the unusual laughter, kind of like that dancing plague. And at number 6, we have the Somerton Man. So this all started when an unidentified man was found dead on Somerton Beach near Adelaide in 1948. In his pocket, authorities discovered a scrap of paper with the words Tamam Shud, meaning ended or finished in Persian. This scrap was traced to a rare book of Persian poetry found in an abandoned car near the beach, which contained a secret code that has still never been deciphered. And there were extensive investigations, but the man's identity still unknown. The cause of death still unconfirmed. Autopsy results suggested poisoning, but the specific poison used was never identified. And even more strange, all the labels had been removed from his clothing, and there was no identifying marks or documents in his possession. Like with any mysterious case, this one has given rise to a number of theories and speculations: espionage, a secret love affair. But despite amateur detectives and even experts' attempts to crack the case, the mystery of the Somerton Man is still a mystery. We're taught a lot about World War II in school, and rightfully so, but there's a very interesting unit of the Allied forces that you probably weren't taught about: the Ghost Army. During World War II, a highly secretive unit known as the Ghost Army played an interesting strategic role in deceiving the enemy. The unconventional unit was composed of artists, designers, and even actors tasked with creating elaborate deceptions to mislead the Axis forces. They employed a wide range of clever tactics: inflatable tanks, trucks, and artillery to create the illusion of this massive military presence where there were actually just a few soldiers. These inflatable props, known as rubber dummies, were so convincing from a distance that they fooled enemy reconnaissance planes. The sound and radio deception were also major components of their operations. They broadcast like fake radio transmissions imitating the sounds of large army movements, complete with phony chatter and like code words. This all misled the enemy about the locations and intentions of Allied forces. And they would also use deceptive camouflage techniques like painting fake vehicle tracks and creating dummy airfields to divert enemy attention away from the actual Allied targets. This unit played a big role in some significant portions of the war, like the Normandy invasion and the Battle of the Bulge, by confusing and distracting the enemy. But a lot of us didn't learn about this in school because the Ghost Army's existence remained top secret for decades after the war, with their efforts only becoming declassified in the 90s. Number 4, the Basano vase. The Basano vase, or vase, cursed, spooky tale connected to an old vase from the 15th century. This vase, also known as the unlucky vase, has a creepy reputation for causing terrible luck and even death to its owners. The story goes that the vase was made in Italy as a wedding gift, but brought misfortune to the newlywed. Bride died unexpectedly soon after the wedding, and from there, things only got worse for the owners. Accidents, illnesses, and untimely deaths seemed to follow anyone who came into possession of the thing. Even people who just handled it reported bad luck, injuries, and just a general sense of doom surrounding it. And because of all this dark history, the Basano vase, or vase, has garnered quite the reputation and has survived through the years, now sitting in an Italian museum. Visitors are warned about its curse, and many find it eerie and unsettling to be around. Next on the list, we have the Devil's Footprints. In February of 1855 in Devon, England, all you English people, you always schooling me on the pronunciation. Is it Devon? Devon? Anyway, a series of mysterious footprints resembling cloven hooves appeared across a vast area of snow-covered terrain spanning roughly 40 to 100 miles. Local residents were unsurprisingly pretty surprised and deeply unsettled by these odd China tracks. Each footprint measured about 4 inches in length, followed a consistent single file pattern as if they were left behind by a two-legged creature with hooves. Now, there's not a lot of solid evidence to sift through with this case, which makes it hard to really take a stance on. It's not like we have photographs of the tracks or anything. Still unknown exactly what caused these tracks. There are tons of theories, of course. Maybe it was just an elaborate hoax, or maybe there was something supernatural going on. Considering when this happened, someone pointed to the devil being the most likely culprit at the time, and, you know, who's to say, right? It could have been Satan. There's also speculation that it could have been caused by some exotic animal, like a kangaroo, somehow made its way over there. There aren't any known records of kangaroos having been in the area at the time, of course. Most likely this was Satan. And at number 2, we have the Flannan Isles lighthouse disappearance. This revolves around the eerie disappearance of 3 lighthouse keepers on a remote Scottish island in 1900. On one December morning, a passing ship noticed something strange. The lighthouse's signal wasn't lit. When they attempted to make contact via signal rockets and a horn, there was no response. So concerned, they reported the situation to the mainland. A rescue party was dispatched to the island, and upon arrival, they found the lighthouse keeper's quarters in a state disarray. The beds appeared to have been hastily abandoned. Personal belongings were left behind. There were no obvious signs of a struggle, though. The kitchen table had even been set for a meal. Even stranger, one of the clocks had stopped, and the lighthouse's logbook contained some strange entries. On December 15th, an entry noted severe winds, but the final log entry on December 26th simply read, "Storm ended, sea calm, God is over all." There were searches of the island and its surroundings, but the 3 lighthouse keepers, James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur, were never found. And coming in at number 1, we have the USS Cyclops. Yes, we have a Bermuda Triangle mystery for you. The disappearance of the USS Cyclops in 1918 is a maritime mystery that has never been solved. This massive US Navy cargo ship with 309 people on board vanished without a trace while traveling in the Bermuda Triangle, a region known for its mysterious ship and plane disappearances, of course. The USS Cyclops was on a routine voyage from Brazil to Baltimore, Maryland, carrying a load of manganese ore but it never arrived at its destination, and no distress signals or messages were ever received. There was a massive search by both the US Navy and the Coast Guard, but no wreckage or debris from the ship was ever found. The ship that just kind of vanished into thin air. Numerous theories had been proposed to explain the disappearance: storms, structural issues, possible sabotage. Some, of course, believe that the Bermuda Triangle's supposed supernatural properties played a role here, while others suggest the ship may have fallen victim to enemy action. This was during World War I. The USS Cyclops remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in maritime history and the largest loss of life in the history of the United States Navy, not directly involving combat.
Number 10. Violet Jessup survived 3 sinking ships. Violet Jessup had some horrible luck, or great luck, however you want to look at it. In 1911, she began working as a stewardess on the White Star Line RMS Olympic. Violet was on board September 20th, 1911 when Olympic left from Southampton and collided with the British warship HMS Hawke. Despite damage, the ship was able to make it back to port without sinking. She continued to work on Olympic until April 1912 when she was transferred to its sister ship, the Titanic. Violet boarded the RMS Titanic as a stewardess on April 10th, 1912. 4 days later, on April 14th, it struck an iceberg in the North Atlantic and sank about 2 hours and 40 minutes after the collision. She was later ordered into Lifeboat 16, and as the boat was being lowered, one of Titanic's officers gave her a baby to look after. The next morning, Violet and the rest of the survivors were rescued by the RMS Carpathia and taken to New York City on April 18th. Then, in the First World War, Violet was a stewardess for the British Red Cross. On the morning of November 21st, 1916, she was aboard the HMHS Britannia, the younger sister ship of Olympic and Titanic that had been converted into a hospital ship when it sank in the Aegean Sea after an unexplained explosion. Britannic sank within 55 minutes, ending the lives of 30 of the 1,066 people on board. Now, it's just incredible that she survived all 3 incidents without getting injured, and I can't believe that after that first sinking, she would go on a boat again, because I know I wouldn't. Number 9. Carbon dioxide went down due to so many deaths. Genghis Khan was the founder and first Khagan of the Mongol Empire, which later became the largest adjoining land empire in history. Having spent the majority of his life uniting the Mongol tribes, he launched a series of military campaigns which conquered large parts of China and Central Asia. In the 13th century, he ended the lives of so many peasants that the carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere were significantly reduced as a result. During his 21-year reign, his destructive armies were responsible for the deaths of up to 40 million people. With so many people gone and nobody left to farm the lands owned by the peasants, nature went back to its true form and grew back into carbon-absorbing forests. It's estimated that 700 million tons of carbon were wiped from the atmosphere, which, to put in perspective, is around the same amount of carbon dioxide generated in a year through global gasoline consumption. That is just crazy. Number 8. The unlucky town of St. Pierre. In the late 1890s and early 1900s, St. Pierre, Martinique was known as a beautiful town, but there was a darkness looming over it, a volcano. Citizens of the area were so used to the volcanic activity that no one took it seriously when the fresh steaming vent holes and earth tremors started during April 1902. The minor explosions began at the summit of the volcano, ash began to rain down continuously, and the nauseating stench of sulfur filled the air, but for some reason they stayed in the town. Even worse, more than 100 snakes slithered down and invaded the town. Yeah, snakes. And they ended the lives of 50 people, and people still stayed living there. Then on May 5th, a landslide of boiling mud and water from the Etang Set crater spilled into the River Blanche and 23 workmen died. This was followed by a tsunami that ended the lives of hundreds of people. Now, this naturally caused concern in the town and many people wanted to leave. So yeah, people just stayed there and went on with their lives while all of this was happening. Even after the whole snake situation, it couldn't be me. Now, 3 days later on May 8th, Mount Pelee finally exploded, sending an avalanche of white-hot lava straight towards the town. Within 3 minutes, St. Pierre was completely obliterated of its 30,000 population, and there were only 2 people who survived. Number 7. The Great Stink. Yes, this is a real thing. The Great Stink was an event in central London during July and August of 1858 in which the hot weather exacerbated the smell of untreated human waste and industrial effluent that was present on the banks of the River Thames. The problem had been mounting for some years with aging and inadequate sewer systems that emptied directly into the Thames. The ensuing melee, which was further aggravated by pointless rumors, made people believe that the bad odor was capable of causing communicable diseases such as cholera. The smell, combined with possible side effects, prompted authorities to seek help of a civil engineer, Joseph Bazalgette. His proposal ensured that the sewage was no longer dumped on the shores of the Thames. Joseph's work ensured that sewage was no longer dumped onto the shores of the Thames and brought an end to the cholera outbreaks. His actions are thought to have saved more lives than the efforts of any other Victorian official. And his sewer system operates into the 21st century, servicing a city that has grown to the population of over 8 million. Number 6. World War I Christmas Truce. During Christmas of 1914, a truce was held between Germany and the UK. They decorated their shelters, exchanged gifts across no man's land, and played a game of football between the soldiers. The event, dubbed as the Christmas Truce, was considered to be a series of unofficial ceasefires during World War I in 1914. The event was celebrated as a peace offering on the Western Front. The idea for the temporary hiatus was put forth by Pope Benedict XV on December 7, 1914. Both Germany and the United Kingdom refused to declare an official ceasefire. However, soldiers from both sides declared a temporary ceasefire on their own. They gathered together and celebrated the season of joy by singing carols. They also exchanged gifts that included cigarettes and plum puddings, and a good gesture, soldiers from both sides played a friendly game of soccer. Now this is so sweet and cute to me, like, aww. Number 5. A baboon was employed. Jack, a Chekma baboon, worked as a railway signal changer in South Africa for 9 years. Yep, you heard that right. He was initially employed as a pet assistant to a disabled railway signalman named James Wide. James, who was a double-leg amputee, purchased Jack and trained him to push his wheelchair and operate rail signals under his supervision. The idea of a baboon manning the signals caused an investigation to be initiated, and the authorities, though skeptical, after witnessing his job competency, officially employed Jack. The celebrity employee was paid 20 cents a day and half a bottle of beer every week. Throughout the 9 years of his employment, Jack never committed a single mistake. Now, I don't know if this is amazing or exploiting an animal, but it's absolutely insane. Number 4. The Dancing Plague. The Dancing Plague was a case of dancing mania that occurred in modern-day France in the Holy Roman Empire from July 1518 to September 1518. Somewhere between 50 and 400 people took dancing for weeks. The outbreak began in July 1518 when a woman by the name Rutefaya began dancing fervently in the street in Strasbourg. She kept up this constant dancing for a week straight. Soon, 36 others joined in on the dancing chaos. In August of that same year, the Dancing Plague had claimed 400 victims. Dancers were beginning to collapse, and it is said some even died due to stroke or heart attacks. No one knew what was causing this reaction, which meant no one understood how to remedy the situation either. Now, by early September, the outbreak began to subside as the dancers were sent to a mountain shrine to pray for absolution. Now, there are many theories behind the phenomenon, the most popular being stress-induced mass hysteria, suggested by John Waller. Other theories include ergo and religious explanations. Number 3. The doctor with a 300% mortality rate. Robert Liston, a surgeon in the 1800s, performed an operation with a 300% mortality rate. Instead of saving the patient, he ended the lives of 3 people. He was renowned for being one of the fastest surgeons alive, which at that time was a very good thing. Anesthesia as we know it didn't exist, so patients were awake for the entire procedure, meaning the shorter it was, the better. Robert was performing a leg amputation, but worked so fast that he accidentally cut off fingers on his assistant's hand. Both the patient and the assistant died later of gangrene, most likely due to the saw being unclean. And what about the third death? Well, doctors and other spectators would often watch these surgeries from the gallery, which was much more up close and personal than medical galleries today. During the procedure, Robert accidentally swiped an elderly doctor with a blade, slicing the fabric of the doctor's suit coat. Thinking he had been cut open, the doctor went into shock and died of a subsequent violent heart attack. Thus, 3 people died during an operation that was meant to save 1 life. Number 2. Clogged toilet sinks submarine. During World War II, the German submarine U-1206 joined the war in early April 1945. Commander Karl Adolf Schlitt proudly captained the crew into battle. However, they forgot one crucial weapon in their war with the Allied forces, a plunger. At the time, the British submarines would store the excrement on the boat and dump it once they returned to land. German submarines were far more advanced and had a complicated toilet system that would shoot waste into the sea. But after being at sea for a few weeks, the submarine's toilet system malfunctioned, leading to a smelly problem. The situation soon became dire as seawater and sewage poured into the sub and began mixing with the ship's battery. With no choices left, Schlitt ordered the submarine to resurface immediately. Unfortunately, they resurfaced near Scotland and caught the attention of the nearby British Royal Navy. Within moments, they were attacked and died. Now, this is actually kind of funny because what do you mean that happened with the toilet? And coming in at number 1 is the disappearance of Prime Minister Harold Holt. On December 17, 1967, Harold Holt, the Prime Minister of Australia, disappeared while swimming in the sea near Porsta, Victoria. Harold knew the area well and had swum there many times before. He did not hesitate in entering the water despite a large swell and visible currents. He swam with one other person as the others he was with considered it unsafe, and he swam into deeper waters and was dragged out into sea. The others called out to him, but he did not raise his arms or cry for help. He soon slipped under the waves and out of sight. The Victoria Police were contacted and initiated what became one of the largest search operations in Australian history. The entire Australian Defence Force was put on high alert. An enormous search operation was mounted and around the beach with helicopters, watercraft, police divers, 2 naval diving teams, and more than 340 people were involved in the search. Strangely, his body was never recovered. He was presumed to have died, and his memorial service was 5 days later, attended by many world leaders. Now, it's generally agreed that the disappearance was a simple case of an accidental drowning, but a number of conspiracy theories surfaced. In 1968, a story in the Sunday Observer claimed that Harold had been assassinated by the US Central Intelligence Agency, supposedly because he intended to pull Australia out of Vietnam. Also, suggestions were made that Harold had his life ended by the North Vietnamese after being incapacitated by a nerve agent, of course, or that he had faked his own death to be with a lover. In 1983, British journalist Anthony Gray published The Prime Minister Was a Spy, in which he claimed that Harold was a long-life spy for the People's Republic of China. According to Anthony, Harold faked his own death to defect to China and was collected by frogmen who dragged him to a waiting submarine. So what happened, I guess we'll never know, but it seems he just went.
Coming in at number 10, it's the Great Stink. Because of course it is. The sewer system in London, England prior to this happening was not a good system, to put it mildly. Human poop would often be pumped into cesspits, tanks, and big old holes in the ground that would quickly fill up and run off into the streets through culverts that ran down said streets. Or the yummy wet waste would seep into people's basements and foundations, creating pockets of methane that would cause explosions from time to time. All the sewage that did successfully go into the system, which was meant primarily for rainwater, just pumped out into the River Thames, and even some sources of drinking water. The problem is, other than the obvious ones there, it didn't actually flow out to sea through the river. No, it actually dispersed among the river thanks to the tidal nature of said river, which meant for centuries the river was just being injected with more and more and more sewage, which seeped into the ground all around the giant open sewer river that in the summer of 1958 all bubbled up to the surface thanks to the heat and released its lovely malodorous stench for all those far and wide around the city of London to sniff up. Nice. Thankfully, Joseph Bazalgette was the civil engineer placed in charge of designing the new system, and boy, did he do a good job. He basically saved the entire city. Joseph's sewers ran parallel of the River Thames and carried all the way east, where it would eventually flow out in the river again, but in a place where it actually did flow out into the sea. He also developed water treatment plants along the new sewer system to clean the nastiness, and he created embankments along the river that would help stop the waste continuing to build up even further. He even came up with other ways for the city to get fresh drinking water that could be used. All so that we would never have to remember this malodorous part of history ever again. Thanks, dude. You did good. Number 9. 3 for 1. Back in the day, a guy by the name of Robert Liston was renowned for being one of the fastest surgeons alive. Being fast as a surgeon then was a pretty damn good thing. And that's because the anesthesia we are accustomed to now didn't exist, so patients were awake for the entire surgery. So yeah, a quick surgery is pretty preferable. The thing with going fast though is that it's extremely easy to make a little whoopsie sometimes. For example, one time Liston was performing a leg amputation, but it turns out that he was working so fast he didn't realize he accidentally cut off 2 fingers of his assistant's hand. That's pretty bad, but then you learn that both the patient and the assistant passed away later of gangrene. But wait, there's even more. Doctors and medical students would often watch these surgeries from the gallery, which wasn't really a gallery like we have today. They were basically right beside you. During that same procedure that I just talked about, Liston accidentally swiped near an elderly doctor with a blade, slicing the fabric of the doctor's suit coat. Problem is, he thought he had been cut open, most likely because this guy just accidentally cut off his assistant's fingers. The doctor went into shock and passed away from a heart attack. This man took out 3 people just trying to save 1. That's insane. Number 8, the Berlin Wall. Most people are probably aware of this, but for younger audiences, maybe not. Basically, for about 30 years during the Cold War era, the Berlin Wall separated Germany's communist east side from the democratic west side. The makeshift wall itself was constructed overnight on the 12th and I guess the 13th of August 1961 by the German Democratic Republic to stop Western fascists from entering East Germany and undermining the building of a socialist state. But really, the wall was mainly just there to stop people from defecting from the east side to the west side. It wasn't exactly a big agreed upon thing, so people in Berlin woke up on August 13th completely cut off from family, friends, work, and their own homes, with no way to get from east to west. Eventually, the quickly built wall was replaced by a 12-foot tall, 4-foot wide concrete barrier guarded and covered with booby traps. At least 171 people were killed just trying to get over, under, or around the Berlin Wall, which stood until the 9th of November 1989. Maybe we should stop building walls between each other and just accept each other. Number 7, the disappeared. I can honestly say that I never knew about this, and I think the US involvement may be why no one wants you to know. Also, forewarning, I'm sorry if I mispronounce anything here. Feel free to correct me down below, and that goes for all the points. So, in September 1973, Chile's president Salvador Allende was overthrown in a coup that was assisted by the US government. General Augusto Pinochet then took over, and he was not good. Augusto was a very ruthless leader and did not let up on anyone who spoke out against him. Journalists, politicians, celebrities, pretty much anyone who spoke out seemed to suddenly disappear. Some were later found in alleyways or ditches all over Santiago, while others were never found at all. This American-backed leader essentially used the National Stadium as a secret terror base where he rounded up those who opposed him and did some pretty unspeakable things. During the 17 years that he ruled, around 40,000 people were subjected to horrible treatment, while at least 3,200 of them passed away or just straight up disappeared. Number 6, atom bomb baby. J. Robert Oppenheimer first witnessed the devastation caused by the device that he created on July 16, 1945. He was not wrong to be afraid of it. Ever since the obliteration of Nagasaki and Hiroshima, taking the lives of between 129,000 and 226,000 people, the entire world knows the absolute world-ending potential nuclear war could unleash. Oppenheimer was the leader of the Manhattan Project in Los Alamos, New Mexico, beginning in 1942, which was basically meant to figure out how to use atomic energy for the military. They were successful enough that it directly led to Oppenheimer wanting to completely stop development, and then, when they wouldn't, he straight up resigned. Instead, he became chairman of the General Advisory Committee of the Atomic Energy Commission, and in October 1949, he opposed the development of the devices that he helped create. This simple opposition led to him being labeled a communist supporter, suspended from secret nuclear research, and stripped of his security clearance by the Atomic Energy Commission. As soon as these devices were created and we saw their full unbridled power, not to mention the fallout that takes place afterwards, I think we can all say we would like to forget that this level of destruction is even real in the first place. Number 5, saved. We may want to forget the destructive power of those nuclear devices, but we should acknowledge 2 times that we were saved from all-out nuclear war. The first incident was in 1962 during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Soviet Vice Admiral Vasily Arkhipov, which I think I pronounced right, was on board a nuclear sub near Cuba. Unfortunately, the submarine was unable to pick up any incoming radio signals, which freaked everyone out on board, and they were unsure sure whether war had actually started or not. There was a vote among 3 officers on whether or not to launch a nuke. We need to thank all our lucky stars that Vasily, being the lone no vote, saved us all on that day. But there was another time. In 1983, during the Cold War, sunlight reflecting off of high altitude clouds confused the Soviet missile detection system, causing it to indicate that there were 5 incoming missiles assumed to be American. A lone Soviet Lieutenant Colonel, Stanislav Petrov, reasoned that if the US was initiating nuclear war, it would likely be an all-out attack and not just 5 missiles. He was right, and against military orders, Petrov determined it to be a false alarm and avoided a retaliatory launch by the USSR. Arkhipov and Petrov avoided all-out nuclear war. Never forget these guys. Number 4, Chinatown, LA. I bet you won't find this one in your history books, kids, but you should. In 1871, specifically on October 24th, 1871, a large mob of about 500 white men raided Chinatown in Los Angeles. This resulted in the brutal passing of at least 20 Chinese Americans, but on top of that, the mob also stole an estimated $1.5 million worth of property. Even though there is absolutely no justification for this level of animosity, the mob formed in response to a shootout that had taken place that same day that ended up taking the life of police officer Robert Thompson. That itself caused a commotion, and people began shouting the absolutely horrible statement that the Chinese were trying to take the lives of white people. You add some fear together with some ignorance and a large heaping spoonful of racism, and boom, a mob emerged. It was the very start of a decade of similar occurrences against Asian American communities in the US, which even led to the passing of the Chinese Exclusion Act, which prohibited all immigration of Chinese laborers. It's horrible, but that's America's history, ain't it? Number 3, the Salem Witch Trials. Speaking of American history and irrational fear, ever heard of the Salem Witch Trials? You probably have. Between June and September of the year 1692, around 19 men and women were found guilty of witchcraft and burned at the stake in the small, seemingly super religious community of Salem, Massachusetts. The obvious idiocracy and horror of this event shocked the world, and in an almost sick twist of things, the trials have spawned hundreds of films, books, scholarly articles, and plays. The men and women that lost their lives that day were convicted of their witchcraft crime based on the evidence of a group of young village girls who claimed to have been, quote, bewitched. The fear of this was compounded by family feuds and Native American attacks, and it developed into complete madness and hysteria that quickly spread throughout colonial Massachusetts. After that initial burning, another 150 men and women were accused in the spring of 1692 and were only allowed to survive if they confessed to the crime of witchcraft. Number 2, Chernobyl. Chernobyl is the site of the Soviet nuclear power plant that in April of 1986 had a serious accident due to flawed reactor design and staff that didn't really get the best training. The cause of the accident itself was explained really well in the HBO miniseries and at the trial that took place in real life, and I'm much too silly to explain how it happened here, but it resulted in a steam explosion and fires that released 5% of the radioactive core into the environment. Just 5%. The explosion itself ended 2 workers' lives with acute radiation poisoning affecting a confirmed 123 people and ending 28 of those people's lives. Around 5,000 cases of thyroid cancer with 15 fatal incidents were probably caused by the radioactive iodine fallout. Look, it was not good, it was scary, and what was potentially even scarier was the way people tried to cover it up. So maybe it's best that we don't forget about this one. And finally, in at number 1, it's Armenia. Now I didn't know about this one either, so it looks like we're both learning today, huh? Armenia became part of the Ottoman Empire all the way back in the 15th century and was for the most part a Christian country. The Ottoman leaders were not very happy about this. In fact, they were furious. Mistreatment of Christian Armenians became pretty regular, and they were usually taxed more heavily and were given even fewer rights. Naturally, as you may expect, Armenians began to protest, but that wasn't going to be allowed to happen for long. Turkish military officials began slaying hundreds of thousands of Armenian people beginning in 1896. In 1914, after the Turks entered World War I on the side of the Germans, that's when the real death toll began to rise. Military leaders somehow determined that the Armenians were traitors, and so on April 24th, 1915, they took the lives of hundreds of Armenian leaders, which only led to more attacks against the Armenian Armenian people, and that all continued until 1922. The numbers don't really seem real, but more than 1 million Armenians lost their lives between 1915 and 1922. Look, I'm glad we are all now pretty aware of the horror that humans are capable of.
Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have bees. A lot of us know bees as pretty harmless and are kind of cute little pollinators, unless of course you're allergic or terrified. But truthfully, bees normally do a lot more good than harm. That was, of course, until an experiment in the 1970s went awry and caused a new crossbred bee. This experiment was to take a regular honeybee and breed it with a bee that is found in Africa that produces a lot more honey. And of course, the goal was to produce a manageable bee that would also be able to provide more honey than a regular honeybee. Well, the bees that came out were a lot less manageable, and they didn't even make more honey. After this experiment ended, however, the bees got out into the environment, and the 80s saw the beginning of the trouble. The bees are not only aggressive towards other kinds of bees, which creates a huge problem, but they are also very aggressive towards humans. And when these bees sting, their stinger stays with them, so they can sting multiple times. Victims of these swarms receive 10 times as many stings as regular swarms. They react to disturbances 10 times faster, and they will also chase the disturbance a quarter of a mile. Imagine. These bees have actually caused at least 1,000 deaths, so it's safe to say that this is one experiment gone horribly wrong. In our number 9 spot today, we have lions. In the 1980s, at the Chatbir Zoo in Chandigarh, India, they started an experimental program where they would breed together a domestic lion, which is a bit smaller and has less of a shaggy mane, with an African lion in the hopes that they could be introduced to the wild and help with the dwindling population of wild lions in India. The zoo found 2 African lions that were being used in a circus and brought them in to breed with their 2 Asiatic lions. When the cubs were born, it was clear that this was already a mistake, as the cubs all had severely weak back legs. They were having extreme trouble walking, and as they got older, their immune systems started to fail. By 2000, they had bred more than 70 of these hybrid lions, and they finally decided to stop the program, and all the males were given vasectomies in order to stop any reproduction. There are laws that prohibit them from killing animals, so they were simply just waiting for them to die naturally. When there's a dwindling population of lions, it's insane to me that they wasted 20 years trying to do this when they could have just simply bred the lions that they did have. In our number 8 spot today, we have the human Z. One of the most contentious and ethically charged endeavors pursued by Ilya Ivanovich Ivanov, an extremely controversial Russian biologist, was his endeavor to produce a hybrid offspring between humans and apes. The goal actually was to create a superhuman soldier for military purposes, and as early as 1910, Ivanov presented his concept of achieving such a feat through the means of artificial insemination during the World Congress of Zoologists in Graz, Austria. In the 1920s, Ivanov embarked on a series of experiments aimed at creating a human-ape hybrid in French Guinea. 3 female chimpanzees were selected as potential surrogate mothers, and the experiment began. However, despite his efforts, Ivanov was unable to achieve a successful pregnancy and bring about the desired hybrid offspring. Thank God. Upon his return to the Soviet Union in 1929, Ivanov sought to organize a new set of experiments involving the use of non-human ape seminal fluid and human volunteers. What human would volunteer for that? I don't know, and I don't want to know. However, these plans were met with setbacks, notably the demise of his last remaining orangutan, which delayed the commencement of the proposed endeavors. Ivanov's pursuit of creating a human-ape hybrid was met with considerable controversy and skepticism. Fair enough. The scientific community was divided, with many dismissing his ideas as unfeasible and scientifically dubious. Nevertheless, his experiments reflect a dark chapter in the history of crossbreeding experiments, highlighting the extreme lengths some scientists were willing to go to in the pursuit of scientific knowledge, even if it meant transgressing the boundaries of ethical conduct. In our number 7 spot today, we have the zonkey. Another one of the strange and unsettling experiments from Ivanov involved the creation of hybrid offspring known as zonkies, or zebrases, by crossing female zebras with donkeys. This experiment aimed to explore the possibilities of interbreeding between closely related species and were conducted during the early 20th century. The goal was to create a hybrid offspring that would exhibit a mix of characteristics from both zebra and donkey parents. These experiments were actually somewhat successful, leading to the birth of several zonkies. The resulting zonkies possessed traits from both species, with physical characteristics resembling a combination of zebras and donkeys. They often displayed striped markings on their bodies, similar to those found on zebras of course, and zonkies typically retained the zebra's body shape as well, while inheriting certain donkey features such as a long ear and tuft tails. It's very cute. While these experiments achieved some success in producing hybrid offspring, they did face ethical concerns and criticism due to the manipulation of animal genetics for experimental purposes. In our number 6 spot today we have lions, tigers, and ligers. Crossbreeding experiments between lions and tigers have resulted in the creation of hybrid offspring known as ligers and tigons. Ligers are the result of breeding a male lion with a female tiger, while tigons are the offspring of a male tiger and a female lion. However, while these hybrids have been successful in terms of producing viable offspring, they raise significant concerns and have been regarded as ethically problematic. The primary issue with lion-tiger hybrids is related to their health and welfare. Ligers, in particular, often suffer from various health problems. Their large size, resulting from the combination of their parent species, puts a strain on their bodies, leading to skeletal and organ abnormalities. Ligers also have a higher likelihood of experiencing reproductive issues and shortened lifespans compared to their parent species. Additionally, these crossbreeding experiments are typically carried out for entertainment or commercial purposes, aiming to produce exotic and visually striking animals for display. This has raised ethical concerns about the welfare of the animals involved, as such breeding practices often prioritize profit and human fascination over the well-being of the hybrids. Moreover, these hybrid experiments highlight the blurred boundaries between species and the potential negative consequences of manipulating nature for human curiosity and amusement. While ligers and tigons may attract attention due to their very unique appearances, the ethical implications and potential harm to the animals involved have led to widespread criticism of such crossbreeding practices. In our number 5 spot today we have the farm cattle. In the 1990s, farmers in India were told that if they crossbred their cattle, they'd be able to breed cattle that could produce more milk, which would of course mean more money for them and their families. This should be amazing and great, right? Well, considering why we're all here today, I think we know the answer to that. Different breeds of bulls were brought in and farmers were expecting great things, but they ended up being stuck with cattle that did produce more milk, but also needed way more higher quality food, or else they'd stop producing more milk. And they were also less resistant to the local diseases, so they required more veterinary visits as well. So it's kind of like this situation of, yes, they are producing more milk, which will get us more money, but they also cost us more, and truthfully, most of the times the increased milk production did not outweigh the growing costs. In our number 4 spot today we have the wolfen. Wish I never had to say the word wolfen, but unfortunately they do exist. These guys are created when a female common bottlenose dolphin is bred with a male false killer whale. They are extremely rare and have been found in the wild, but unfortunately most of the ones that have existed were bred in captivity. The first recorded wolfen was born at the Tokyo SeaWorld in 1981, and he very sadly died just 200 days later. Probably a prime example of why maybe they shouldn't really exist in the first place. The first that was born in the United States that actually miraculously survived was at a sea life park in Hawaii in May of 1985, and her name is Kikemalu. She ended up having 3 babies. The first passed away after a few days, the second passed away at the age of 9, but thankfully the third one is still living. The most recent update I could find seems to state that at this point, both mother and her daughter are still alive, but unfortunately they remain in captivity. In our number 3 spot today we have the beefalo. Okay. Beefalo sounds kind of cute and silly. It also looks pretty normal. So what could be wrong with this one? Well, let's start at the beginning. A guy named Charles Buffalo Jones started breeding them in 1906 because the bison population in Arizona at the time was exceptionally low. So bison were bred with domestic cattle in order to produce a hardy commercial animal. He ended up just giving up on this and released the animals, who were then managed by the state, and the numbers remained relatively low because of the limited hunting licenses. Well, when the beefalo found their way into a national park where hunting is banned and there aren't any natural predators, the population began to grow by 50% a year. That's wild. So none of this is necessarily bad, but it's the animals' environmental impact that is the real trouble. First off, they're very thirsty animals and can consume 10 gallons each per trip to a watering hole, so they can obviously clear up a water source pretty quickly. Not to mention the fact that they do their business in the water and how their heavy weight compacts the soil. Basically, they have totally thrown the ecosystem off balance and have pushed out other animals, and the insects and plant life around have also been affected. In our number 2 spot today we have the Pyrenean ibex. The Pyrenean ibex is an animal that went extinct around 2000 in a horrible turn of events. The last one was a female named Celia, and she was killed in an awful falling tree incident. These animals were native to the Pyrenees Mountains on the border of Spain and France. Back in the medieval ages, their population was reduced drastically to an endangered level. This is due to 2 things: being hunted as well as the spread of human disease. Flash forward to 2003, however, and scientists tried to bring them back to life. This is the first extinct creature that scientists ever tried to clone. That is absolutely crazy, and it actually worked for 7 minutes only. DNA from Celia, the last living individual of the species, was taken and implanted into the womb of a domestic goat. From here, the clone was in fact born, but due to lung complications was unable to survive for longer than 7 minutes. It was a short life, but a monumental one that definitely broke new ground in the scientific world. And finally, in our number 1 spot today we have the human pig experiment. Back in 2017, researchers at the Salk Institute for Biological Studies achieved a significant milestone by producing the first ever human pig chimera, as reported in the journal Cell. The team used cells from an adult human to create stem cells, which were then injected into early stage pig embryos. These embryos were implanted into female pigs and allowed to develop for several weeks. Approximately 1 in every 100,000 cells in the later stage pig embryos was derived from humans. In this human pig experiment, the researchers encountered trial and error in finding human stem cells that developed in alignment with the pig's embryo's timeline. The ultimate goal of such research is to potentially grow human organs within pigs for transplantation, addressing the shortage of donor organs. While the study raises possibilities for life-saving organ transplants, critics argue that mixing human and animal elements crosses ethical boundaries. The National Institutes of Health in the United States has prohibited federal funding for human chimera research, although there have been indications of potential relaxation under careful monitoring. The research opens up opportunities and ethical questions, but fears of creating half-human, half-animal chimeras are not applicable to this study. The next challenge for the researchers is to improve efficiency and guide the human cells to form specific organs within the pig host.